I still remember that night, clear as yesterday. The club was mostly empty, just a smattering of folks who didn't have anything better to do. The air was thick with stale beer, the low murmur of a barely engaged crowd, and the half-hearted strumming of our guitarist, who was about as enthusiastic as the patrons slouched in their seats. Just before the night's next act, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I stepped back behind the curtain and took the call quietly, glancing around to make sure no one could overhear. "How long is he going to be there?" I asked, keeping my voice low. The person on the other end told me everything. When I closed the call, I found myself clutching the phone tighter than I'd realized. I needed to pull myself together. "The show must go on," I muttered, putting my phone back in my pocket and giving myself a mental shake. Our next act was this young magician I'd hired for the night, tall, dressed in faded velvet, with crimson gloves. I could tell he was a bit nervous. After all, this crowd wasn't exactly the most appreciative. "All right, kid," I told him, patting his shoulder, "you're up next." The crowd's thin, not expecting much. "Do your best, okay?" He took the stage, and I watched as he bowed, then opened his arms with a welcoming grin. "Good evening, ladies and, well, mostly gentlemen," he said with a wink. Of course, there was a heckler, a drunk near the bar, who slurred, yeah. "So what you gonna do?" But the magician's smile didn't falter for a second. He leaned in, looking around the room, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "Actually, I'm not going to tell you what I'll do. Instead, you," he waved a hand across the audience, "are going to tell me what I'll do." That got their attention. A ripple of interest went through the room, and some of the people even leaned forward, curious. And then, the heckler laughed. "What a joke," he slurred again. But the magician just smiled wider. "Granted," he said, snapping his fingers. A puff of smoke burst in front of the heckler, and when it cleared, the poor guy was clutching at his throat, moving his lips, but no sound came out. The crowd laughed and clapped. Then someone else shouted, "He's just a plant." "A plant, you say?" The magician grinned and snapped his fingers again. In another puff of smoke, the heckler was gone, replaced by a potted plant sitting on a stool. Now, that got everyone going, laughter, applause, even a few whistles. The magician continued his act, playing with the audience, turning little requests into flashy tricks. When he got to this young couple, he pulled a penny out from behind the girl's ear and held it up, saying, "A penny for your thoughts." She looked at the penny, then shrugged. "If you're taking requests, I owe $25K in student loans. Can you make that disappear?" The magician's eyes sparkled, and he closed his hand around the penny, making it vanish with a little puff of smoke. When he opened his hand, there it was again, a shiny coin. "There you are," he announced, handing it back. The girl sighed, clearly unimpressed, until her boyfriend leaned in, examining the penny closely. "It's a 1944 steel penny. These go for tens of thousands." The girl's eyes widened in shock, and the crowd erupted in more applause. People were starting to look at this magician as if he might actually have some real magic up his sleeves. When his set wrapped up, I watched him packing his things, tucking away his props, with this careful, deliberate precision. "Kid, you did good out there," I said, lighting up a cigarette. "Don't know how you pulled off that ring trick, but they ate it up." He just smiled and went back to packing his gear. "The best tricks are the simplest ones," he said cryptically. I exhaled smoke, thinking about everything that had been weighing on me that night. I wasn't sure if I should ask, but I found myself saying, "Listen, how'd you feel about doing a birthday party?" The magician looked at me, curious. "A birthday party?" I pulled out a handful of bills and fanned them out. "I can make it worth your while." But he didn't take the money. He just looked at me, waiting for me to continue. So I did. "It's not about the money," I said softly. "It's my grandson. He's going through a rough time, and I thought a little magic might lift his spirits. He's turning 11 tomorrow." The magician paused, looking at me with an expression that told me he understood exactly what I was asking. The next day, we found ourselves at the children's hospital, where my grandson was being treated. The nurses gathered the kids into the cafeteria, their tired faces brightening as they whispered about the magician. Some of the kids were in wheelchairs, others had 4 poles trailing behind them. But they were all excited. And then, with a dramatic pop and a cloud of smoke, the magician appeared in the corner of the room, his red gloves bright against his dark coat, his smile warm and welcoming. One little girl asked in a hushed voice, "Where'd you come from?" Before he could answer, my grandson's voice cut through the room. "What's the point of this?" He was glaring at the magician with a look that no 11-year-old should have. He crossed his arms defiantly. "You really think pulling rabbits out of hats is going to make us feel better?" The magician met his gaze, calm and gentle. "No rabbits here," he said, "just a guy trying to bring a little magic, if you'll let me." Some of the kids looked uncertain, glancing between the magician and my grandson. But the magician simply nodded, as if accepting the challenge. "Tell me what you want, and I'll do my best," he offered, his tone soft but confident. My grandson's expression hardened, and he smirked. "I want a brontosaurus." Without missing a beat, the magician grinned. "Granted," he said. With a flick of his wrist, he snapped his fingers, and there it was, a tiny, toy-sized brontosaurus, about the size of a cat, wandering around his feet. The kids gasped and leaned forward, mesmerized. My grandson, still skeptical, reached out to touch it, and his fingers met solid, scaly skin. His mouth fell open. But just as quickly as it had appeared, the little brontosaurus flickered and vanished. The magician sighed. "Unfortunately, hospital rules don't allow pets." The kids laughed, and I could see my grandson's face softening, his tough exterior cracking a little. But then he blurted out, "Make me better." His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a knife. "That's what I want. I wish to get better." The magician looked heartbroken, his smile faltering as he whispered, "I'm so sorry, but one trick to a customer." My grandson's face crumpled, and the whole room fell silent. You could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air, like everyone was holding their breath. The magician turned to a little girl beside him, pulling a penny from behind her ear. "A penny for your thoughts," he said gently, handing it to her. "What's your wish?" The girl took the penny, glancing over at my grandson, then back at the magician. "I want him to get better," she whispered, her voice trembling with sincerity. For the first time that night, I saw the magician's eyes mist up, his smile turning bittersweet. He nodded slowly and raised his hand, a single tear escaping down his cheek. "This might just be my best trick ever," he whispered, as he snapped his fingers. And in that moment, there was magic in the air.